Okay, cool. So we're here uh, to discuss Eros and Civilization by Marcuse.
Mm.
And before you joined, Eddie and I were just sort of really generally chatting. That I felt like it didn't really add a lot to Freud. But what was your, I don't know, do you have any like kind of big thoughts on it before we get into anything specific?
I don't think it was, like you said, it wasn't trying to add anything to Freud. I think his point was to use Freud, and I think it was more in a response to those who have followed Freud and how they've interpreted or used Freud. Not Freud himself. I don't think he's trying to change. I think he's trying to elaborate on Freud specifically to point out how it's relevant or like where it's relevant.
Did Freud write about capitalism? I feel like I'm having trouble recalling. I feel like the answer is not really.
No, no, it was really a footnote. Kind of when he talks about communism.
Right, and Marx would have been like fairly popular around then, right? Fairly widely read at that point.
Oh yeah, I mean Marx at this point is like it's an undeniable classic, or it's like Freud. It's just a part of like culture. Just the fact that people think about themselves as laborers, or the entire talk we like kind of like feminism. Just to think about women as a class of people. The same with like labor as a class.
Right, but the two can
You know,
coexist, right? I mean, like you can kind of have a Freudian outlook and a Marxist outlook.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I think in a certain sense they're frameworks through which to view things. Like it's like
Yeah,
says where to look for certain things.
right. Rather than
You
an
know,
answer or an explanation, it's more of a way of looking at it.
yeah, yeah. Interpretive framework is how I'd put it.
Hmm.
Um, that can reveal certain things.
I would love to
Like
see. Oh, sorry.
no go.
You know how they have like anti-Marxist like protesters? They should have like
Uh huh.
anti-Freudian protesters, and just people out there like these Freudians like are ruining America.
Well, I think they did actually, didn't they? Like, isn't that it just happened in the like 60s or 70s?
Mm. By like
By the way, can you
academics.
hear me all right still?
Hmm. Yeah,
Okay, I was holding up my phone, then I put it down. Just
yeah,
wanted to make
but
sure I could still be heard.
like by academics, I'm thinking of like these like redneck Proud Boys that are like anti-Marx, but like don't know anything about Marx.
I think a lot of
What the
feminists
fuck?
are not fans.
Mhm.
I think a lot of feminists have take serious issue with a lot of Freud.
Yeah, I could totally
Yeah,
see that.
but the whole thing with the like anti-Marxist protesters, that's also kind of like that's not even Marx, like or there it's just it's like a paper tiger that they like to fight against.
Yeah. Well, maybe for
Like
the
they've got a
what do they have?
Oh, I was going to say they have a understanding. Like I'm not sure if you ever watched the Zizek Peterson debate, but they've got as bad an understanding of Marxism as Peterson does.
Yeah.
They've read like the first part of the Communist Man. They've read like a few paragraphs into the Communist Manifesto, and like that's about it. And then they've heard they know it's bad.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know what kind of other Marxist understanding most people would have. Like I ordered Capital, and that thing is a fucking textbook. Nobody's going to read that
Oh,
outside of
dude,
like academic philosophy.
dude, did you actually want to go through Capital?
No. No, that's my
Oh,
point.
okay.
That's my point. It's 1,000 plus pages of like economics.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's rough. I mean, I think the chapter on like commodity fetishism is probably both where Marx intersects with Freud
Hmm.
and where Marx is very interesting today. So I guess what's his name, Baudrillard, the mirror of production is maybe more interesting than Marx.
Is he the simulation guy?
Yeah, simulacra and simulation.
Yeah, I'm not really that familiar. What school of thought is he? Right, he's not Frankfurt School. He's more recent.
Oh no, he's the most like accepting of the postmodernist term. I mean he's a French. He kind of comes after um, uh,
Foucault.
Foucault and Derrida,
Yeah.
but I think he's kind of his own. He's kind of like late 20th century. postmodern theory, I guess, is where you'd categorize him.
Okay.
Like his thoughts are on the relation, or I think a lot of his ideas are around media and how media intersects with like human subjectivity.
Okay, kind of like,
and just like
Chomsky?
Not like Chomsky.
Okay.
I mean, not very kind of in the way that how like, what is it? Someone talked about Chomsky and Foucault. Their debate is being like two ships passing in the night.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that they're kind of
talking about similar things, but it doesn't really intersect.
Yeah, no, or it's just they're just talking about on a completely different sort of level of analysis, or they're just kind of in separate realities.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I haven't read much Baudrillard. I actually have his book because I was a total Matrix nerd in high school, and so he was the first philosophy book I bought.
Oh, cool.
Simulacra and Simulation.
Oh, is that where the simulation...
But I never read it. What's up?
Is that where the simulation, like, thought experiment comes from?
Well, sort of. I mean, the main thing about, or where it starts off, is the Borges fable, in which the cartographers of the empire draw up a map so detailed that it ends in covering the territory exactly.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's the whole thing is the map is not the that phrase, the map is not the territory.
No.
His thing is essentially that the map is more real than the territory. That the idea of the desert of the real, that comes directly out of Baudrillard.
Okay.
When how it's like, welcome to the desert of the real.
I feel like you've mentioned it before, but I forget in what context.
No,
it might have been
the Matrix. This is Morpheus.
Oh, got it.
When he takes Neo into the little thing and shows him Earth as it really is now.
Okay.
He says, welcome to the desert of the real. But the idea is essentially that what mostly composes our reality is not material objects, but signs and the like, how do you call it? I want to call it like ideological richness, in the sense of
like how you
like
associate
brands.
Value to it.
Yeah, or just like, well, where value value lies is not in the material that produces it, in the labor that produces it, but in the sign that it contains. Like, think of most ideally of the supreme brick.
Right, because it wouldn't be worth anything if people didn't want it.
Yes, but it's also what they want is the brand. It's the exclusive item. It's almost like magic cards, Like, it's just like a cheap,
right, it's what it means.
Like mass.
Like you wear a certain, you have a brand, or like you can, consume a certain number of brands, and that's your identity of your that's how you identify yourself.
It's funny. God, we're going way off Marcuse now.
I know. I was going to say we should come back to Marcuse. But what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was thinking Lacan. I was listening to some talks about Lacan and how Lacan thought of and this is kind of where, they say you should read structuralism before you should read Lacan.
Right. Like I have Heidegger sitting on my shelf that I'm not going to read. So I'm not even going to get to post-structuralism.
Yeah. Well, no, Heidegger is structuralism, right? Or one of the...
Right.
But what is it? Like the idea about that language is like the relation of words to other words. Mm-hmm. That the meaning of a word is not in the word itself, but is in its relation to the other words.
Right.
And so no word is a thing in itself. It just is like a pointer to other pointers.
Right.
And so each of those things, so a word, or this is like then the idea of not just a word, but how then a word connects to images and in the entire like web of in a certain way, just the way that Lacan says that the unconscious is like a language, that the unconscious is composed or is constituted by these relations of signs.
Yeah, it's not like
the languages.
It's not the agent that makes you like go out and pursue certain symbols over others. Because that's kind of how it would seem to me. Like your upbringing controls what sort of like context associations you have with different things and like what you think is good and what you think is bad. And then you look for things like that in symbols of like other things. Like, you know, you like something because it's a particular color or because, you know, it has some sort of association that really has nothing to do with the thing itself.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking you're kind of rubbing off on like one of the, I was kind of going back over Marcuse, especially the early chapters, and chapter 2 really leapt out to me a lot more this time than it did before. In terms of like the reality principle,
yeah,
and how the reality principle itself differs. It's like different cultures have different reality principles.
Right. So you have surplus repression.
Yeah. Or yeah, you tend to have. Well, just in the sense that, and actually surplus repression is an interesting idea. I wonder what you guys think about it. Just in terms of the fact that no society ever, or just the fact that the necessary work is not like evenly distributed.
I mean, that part makes sense, where like some people just have less dominated, oppressed lives than other people, and it's like a spectrum. That seems reasonable. But to then tie like individual aspects of your repression back to society in like a way that it's different in the U.S. than it would be in Russia, I just feel like it's too. We're already beyond the realm of like anything empirical. I feel like you can't measure these things, so it's like maybe there's surplus repression that has to do with like the material conditions of society, or maybe you're just repressed, and I don't know, it's coming from a lot of different places.
Well, like, you know how he starts off in saying that Freud's theory is the greatest indictment as well as the greatest support of civilization?
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, like, how do you call it? Because they're to what I think Marcuse sees in Freud, and I also see in Freud, is that, you know, you can't just pursue pleasure. You know, the reality principle and how it warps the individual is, in a certain sense, necessary to the individual. It's not
exactly.
It's not an entirely. Our biology would not be able to exist as it does. Like we wouldn't be dominating this planet, you know, if we did not give up some amount of like libidinal pursuit.
Okay, I might be misunderstanding how all these terms relate to each other, but it seems like the libido he's saying comes from the reality principle attacking the pleasure principle, or like dominating it. As in, like, if you didn't have the reality principle, you wouldn't have a libido. You would just be like, I'm having even trouble conceptualizing what that would look like, because it sounds like it happens right from birth, where you immediately start to, you know, develop the reality principle over the pleasure principle. So I don't even know what the pleasure principle is if you've never expressed it.
Well, I thought the pleasure principle is just the fact that we want to feel good, right? Like that there's certain things that feel good and there's certain things that feel bad, and we want to feel good.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I saw that as the principle, the it itself is wanting to feel good.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the reality principle is the counter to that, because if it were, and so then in a certain sense, like he talks about the ego becomes a structure to protect. It both dominates the id, but then it protects the id from the environment, because in the mindless pursuit of pleasure, it would hurt itself. Right. You know, it wouldn't be able to survive.
Right.
I mean, partly because.
Oh, sorry.
And you? No, go.
I was going to say, and that's where it seems to me that there is no libido without the reality principle. Because if you have just the pleasure principle, you don't really have any conception of yourself or any sort of agency. You're just mindlessly pursuing whatever feels best. And that's not really libido. That's not really anything, right? It's just a flat desire.
Well, Mike, are you trying to talk about human desire? Because this is the thing that is developed in, like, from Freud and in psychoanalysis, that I don't think is very analytical and probably ought not be, or quantifiable, and why I think like why I appreciate Freud, even though I don't think it's like empirically testable. It's this idea of like human desire is like different. It's not a natural sort of thing like water flowing downhill or whatever, you know. It itself is already this weird fight between in our own internal structures and forces within our own self. Our own self is not one particular coherent thing. Like what we call ourselves is specifically antagonistic forces within us.
Yeah.
And that their desire, and like the idea even of like desire, you know, as he puts later on in chapter 2, you know, he talks about how our current reality principle has limited desire to the genitals. That, or I think Freud developed it, but I couldn't exactly trace where. But Marcuse talks about how, in a certain sense, we gave up the pleasures of the mouth, of the nose, you know, and we kind of relegated more aesthetic pleasure to eye and ear, and we've relegated sexual pleasure.
Can you try moving closer to your computer if you're on a Bluetooth? I'm just having a lot of trouble.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Can you hear me better now?
I mean, it's kind of in fits and starts. Like I can mostly get what you're saying, but if you're just closer, that'd be better.
Yeah, the problem is I have this weird thing around my neck. I'm just worried that I was maybe blocking the ear hole or the microphone hole.
Okay,
I'll try and stay in a single posture.
But yeah, I think I got what you're saying. Like the self is multiple things, and it's the antagonism of the reality principle applied to the pleasure principle. Yeah, and that's kind of
so like
yeah. I don't know. There were just sort of a few things that like were not very clear how they all relate to each other. Like, you know, okay, can you explain how the Nirvana principle relates to Eros and Thanatos? Because it kind of seems like the Nirvana principle is a striving towards an equilibrium, and the greatest equilibrium of all, he's saying, is death. But
yeah, okay, yeah.
But it doesn't seem like it's exclusively like a death drive. Like it seems like it's sort of somewhere in the middle.
Well, what he seems to be, like I need to go back to Freud and because here's the thing, I've always heard, so when you hear death drive, it's like you think of, oh, you know, people want to die, you know, but then I've also heard that death drive is not that people want to die. It's that people want immortality. Or they want, it's like death drive is most clearly seen in like repetition, or like that people want to repeat.
Yeah, that's not how I understand it.
Repeat things like almost. No, I know this is not in Freud. I haven't even seen this in Freud, but I've heard this. People say this about Freud.
Okay.
Just in the sense that the death drive is this like. And that's the thing I've been looking for. Where in Freud are they seeing this?
Well, I don't even think it's
Marcuse seems to be. Sorry, what's up?
Oh, I was going to say I don't even think it's the desire to die. I think it's like the desire to kill, and it sort of includes like maybe the desire for your own death on some level. But like, it seems like death drive does not imply death of the self, more like destroying things.
Yeah. Well. In Marcuse, I see this in two ways. He seems to say that there's death drive in the wanting to cease the anxiety. You know, like that you want like resolution and closure. You want a feeling of like satisfaction. You want the pleasure. You know, so it's like in a certain sense, like the pleasure is like it's kind of out of control. Like pleasure itself is not like a good thing. Like Eros. You know, he kind of talks about how Eros is kind of contradictory. You want to join with others, but in your joining, you exclude others, you know, but then so the idea with, you know, when he talks about the death drive in the sense of closure or like wanting cessation it's almost the wanting desire to cease, you know, wanting to be that's free.
That's the Nirvana principle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in the sense of, but if you think about that, if desire truly ceases, like you're just like you die, you know, like the organism can't really survive there.
Well, the organism survives, but you die, like your you-ness. So like physically you survive, which kind of makes sense to me because right, don't our
No,
biological processes operate on like a subliminal level? Like our body could function without our mind under the right circumstances, couldn't it?
well, yeah, as a vegetable, but you can't, but like think about
Yeah,
all the things that life really requires
yeah,
and
that's
why
true.
the reality principle exists. Like you need water, you need food, you know, you need shelter. All of those things, you know, to get water, you have to go get it. If, you know, nature's constantly changing, so we need to like maybe find different water sources. You know, maybe other organisms like us want to have all the water, you know, or all the food, you know,
Hmm.
like to get the water, to get food, to like even your shelter, which is maybe the most important thing. Like shelter doesn't just last. You have to rebuild it. You have to maintain it. And then over time, you have to transmit how to build and maintain that to like your previous, to new generations of you.
Yeah,
You know, these are all the reality principle as I see it, you know, in the sense of there is labor that must be done so that life can continue,
yeah, and that's in the
right?
service of Eros,
Sorry, say that again.
and that's in the service of Eros.
Yeah.
I
In the end,
speaking
in
of
the end, it serves
repetition,
Eros.
there was something that just didn't really make a lot of sense to me, which
Hmm.
is when he talks about the Oedipal. He really talks not about the Oedipal complex, but more like an Oedipal event, where like there was this sort of primal father who dominated his children, and then they banded together and killed him, and then formed civilization. But the way it's
Hmm.
described, and then it sort of repeats a little bit, where he talks about this later, where like then the children end up like presumably dominating their children, but it's not the same. He emphasizes that like when it repeats, it's fundamentally different, and then that just doesn't make sense. How there would be like this one Oedipal event in history, and then
Oh,
like that
Mike.
spawned civilization, right? Like,
Well, see, that's the thing. I'm actually, I've been curious about this because I kind of thought Freud was making like a myth in a certain sense, a myth of civilization formation, or like
mm-hmm.
how did our subjectivities and like how did we go from being just that domination
Right, and
of the strongest.
I could understand it if it's like repeated within the family eternally, and that's just part of like your psychology of growing up, which is that like the father is the dominating force, and then the kids are able to band together and have more strength or whatever. Like that part makes sense, but to then try to have a myth as being like a single event that happened at a point in time doesn't really make sense to me.
I'm not sure if it's a singular event.
I can't read it
I
any other way. I mean, I can try to find the part where he talks
Well,
about it.
see, no, well, see, what did you think about that in Freud? How did you think Freud said it?
I
Because as I understood him, he was just repeating
Yeah,
Freud. He was just
and
saying
this is
how
something that I
he read
disagree with.
Freud.
Right, and this is something that I kind of disagree with Freud on, but less so because Freud describes it as an Oedipal complex, like it's a state of psychology, as in like everybody could be, could have this thing, as opposed to a very like historical, anthropological way of looking at it. It's the same thing that I bristle at with Nietzsche, where it's like these historical investigations are like the least
Oh,
reliable manner of analysis. They're just
yeah.
completely, there's no
Well,
evidence.
well, actually, but how do you call it? Any again, because everything like to see history, like to make sense of things that happen. I mean, shit. Think how hard it is to make sense of things that are happening around us right now.
Yeah.
To go back into history and to pick up the artifacts and to try and draw truth, like what really happened from those things, is just impossible.
Right. And in
Like
fact, you could
even
probably argue that there is nothing in the way of objective truth when you read history. It's just all stories that people have told. Like it's
Yeah,
all been
but I mean,
spun.
but here's the thing: you get different. but that just because it's just stories doesn't mean it doesn't matter or that it's not important, because it's kind of that the what who controls the present now controls the past,
Right.
who controls the past controls the future.
Yeah.
Like the stories that we tell ourselves are not just they're not just stories, and in a certain sense the stories we tell ourselves are like a part of us. They make us.
But these stories are not static.
Wait,
I mean, they constantly change as we have reactions to them. Right? So if we find that like, oh, the Jews never were in Egypt, and then we say, oh, it's just a story that we use. It doesn't have to be factually correct. It's important allegorically.
Yeah.
Well, now the story becomes people used to believe that like the Jews were in Egypt, and then they realized that they weren't, and I don't know. It was no longer important, and that's the story. Like
actually, Mike, that would be a hard one to prove, though, wouldn't it? That sounds to me like, just thinking about that example of, oh, we proved the Jews weren't in Egypt, I'd be highly, highly doubtful.
There's a whole Wikipedia article on this. It's like there's no evidence that there was a mass exodus event. It could be entirely made up.
That is different than proving that they were never there.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't mean that there were never any Jews in Egypt, just that like, yeah, I'm sorry. I should have been more literal.
Oh.
That there was no
Well, I mean, you're talking
exodus.
about whether or not Exodus happened exactly as written.
Or if it happened at all. I mean, honestly, it's like, okay, but sure, as it was written. Like, Jews celebrate Passover, and they tell this story, and this story is false. So why do we keep telling this false story? Isn't there a new story now?
Well, because in a certain sense, it's the story that makes you, right? It's the story that makes you a people.
But no, the story that makes me is the one where I realized it was false. And then that's my story, right? The story that I'm telling you right now is my story. It's not the story of the Jews leaving Egypt. It's the story of learning that it was false.
Yeah, but you can't believe it's false unless the story exists, right? Like, what your negation of the myth is not an absence of the myth.
Yeah.
It's the myth perpetuated in a cynical form.
Well, it's just it's the not myth. It's like putting a not operator before it. And then that becomes the important, I don't know, symbolic guidepost of your development.
Yeah. I guess my point is that to have that, you still have to have the myth in humans, at least, because we're like, I don't know how that works with like computers exactly.
Well, I guess our myth could become, hey, Jews were never in Egypt or something like that, right? Like, all right.
Yeah, well, that's the weird. again where I think it gets a little weird. It's like to say they aren't in Egypt, but again, why does it matter whether they were in Egypt or not? Like
it must because it's factual, right? Like our origin stories should be, to the best of our knowledge, true. Otherwise, I don't know. Like,
I guess I see the it's like that. There was that great line from V from Vendetta that artists tell truth with lies.
Yeah.
Rather than say like conservatives, who tell lies with truth.
This all sounds very postmodernist. I got to warn you. Like.
Well, yeah, because we have so much. An aspect of our postmodern subjectivity is that there's so much information, so much contradictory information, that it's like we're being like, our mind is literally just being tossed about on the sea, and we have no driftwood, or like we're constantly looking for any little bit of driftwood to give us some extra buoyancy and, just to keep our head above water, because there's just too much information, like.
I don't know. I just think something can't be two things, right? Like, if you have encountered something, like there can be multiple truths, but I don't think that they can be describing like the exact same thing, right? Like, Freudianism and Marxism are probably compatible, but like when talking about, all right, that's really hard to give an example of.
Here's the other thing, Mike, like, why do things need to all be coherently fit? So like with Marxism, like there's a lot of Marxism that I think is just like, you can just toss it away. Like, we know better, but you don't need to, like, if the metaphor, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, you don't there's always some good shit in there.
Yeah, the stuff that's not
You don't
false.
need to throw it all away.
Right. You keep the stuff that's not provably false or contradictory. I don't know.
But then
I think closer to what you're saying. Sorry, Danny. Yeah, what I think he was saying is almost that like information, like raw information, is just kind of chaos, and there are different lenses you can use to look at it, and some are more useful than others, and some have pieces that are more useful, and the rest aren't useful to you. So you can toss those out. It's less about finding like what the actual truth is, and just finding a way to view raw data, in a way that's useful to you.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, this is kind of Foucault's thing, but that he kind of gets out of Nietzsche. You don't, how do you call it? You don't really have, it's like the move from, say, data to facts, or even, I think it's even hard to say that you have data collected at all without some framework in which you're already intend to interpret it. Like Foucault's thing is that knowledge or facts are inherent, like they depend on some framework to even be a fact, or like nothing, there are no bare facts in the world.
Well, I don't know. It's just, there are historical facts, right? Like either a thing happened or it did not happen.
No, but what does it mean then that a thing happened?
Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. Nobody would say, well, what if he was not assassinated? Like, wouldn't that lead to some interesting ways that we could look at the world? And it's like, no, it happened. And like, that is the world that we live in. And that is how we need to adapt. And like, no, the facts are the boundaries that are set, right? Like, and as you
But the thing is, when like say, so that's actually an interesting fact in the sense that, but like in terms of where that, think about this, like when we talk about how did World War I start, that Franz Ferdinand was shot, is like why the war started, right?
Well, okay, that's a whole rabbit hole that I'm not saying that he caused World War I. I'm just
I know, but I guess the thing that we why that thing matters as a fact.
I see.
And not I went to the bathroom this morning or not.
Yeah.
Like in a certain sense, like the facts that rise up above other facts it's not a neutral.
Right.
It's not a neutral matter of just, there was a material event in the universe.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
That exists as a fact that you memorize and is learned by all, because it exists in a story that we tell ourselves about ourselves and where we exist and how we got here, Yeah, we don't talk about the alliances and, we don't talk about aristocracy and inbreeding and,
and I'm happy.
Strange politics of Europe.
I'm happy for the relative value of the assassination of Franz Ferdinand to wax and wane. Like, it doesn't matter to me, I don't think, if it was the cause of World War I or if it was just like a thing that nobody really paid attention to. But you can't have a philosophy in which you deny that it happened, right? Like,
well, but
and so if you're advocating for something, like if you're Freud and you make this claim and it just turns out that claim is false, then it's no longer like admissible for like further arguments.
No, but it's like Darwin, in a certain sense, Freud's providing a framework through which facts reveal themselves differently. Just as think about the debate between evolution and creation. So you can show fossils to a creationist or, a biblical literalist, let's call them, and that fact is very different. That fossil is proof of the devil's, interference in our world and his attempt to move us away from Jesus, right? In Darwinian evolutionary theory, it's different. That fossil means, okay, it has these characteristics. It's part of this like line of ancestral descent, that we can observe from other fossils. The theory itself is not entirely disprovable because it it gives you a framework through which to view the overwhelming phenomena of reality of the world. And
I don't know. I just think that as reasonable people, like, we have to be honest that we reject creationism, right? Because it's false it's like patently false, right? I mean,
yeah, but Mike, I wonder if you'd have the same. I wonder if you'd have the same view, say, like,
right, if I was
100, 200 years ago, if the political constellation was very different,
right? But it is
your
different.
Your life relied in your ability to have a job, or to that people would not come and kill you, right, would rely on you acknowledging what fact,
right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and but that doesn't make it truer back then. It just means that we just didn't know any better. But now we do know better, and so we have sort of uncovered what is.
I guess what I think, I think there's a lot of arrogance in science. I guess I see that science's value is in its humility, not its arrogance. And so I want to fight against that.
No, but you just have to take certain things. We
haven't figured out.
You just have to assume that certain things are true in science. And this is one of those things. Here's the thing,
Mike. I think this is maybe a good example of the Nirvana principle at work.
What? I want everything to be ordered.
No, you want it to, like, be resolved. You want the thing to be true, and it's settled, and it's good, and I don't need to worry about it anymore because we know it's there, and it's not going to move.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, it's foundational, and now we can build off that, knowing that this thing, like, once we turn around, it's not going to, like, run off somewhere.
But yes, I agree that is probably the Nirvana principle at work. But what does being aware of that even mean? I mean, that would be like saying, oh, you've used your mouth to, I don't know, make this argument, and primates have mouths, so you're a primate. It's like, yeah, I mean, we're in pursuit of the Nirvana principle. Also, these things, it's not like what I'm saying is false, I guess, is the point
not
trying
to
make. And you can have a constellation of, like, you know, reasons or motivations for any sort of worldview, and you can proceed with them until you reach a point that there is like a contradiction or it's proven to be false.
I'm stuck. I'm still thinking about Michael's World War I example with Franz Ferdinand. Like, obviously, you can say that happened, but so that would be something that's like an objective fact of history. But would World War I as a concept be like an objective fact of history, or would that be a framework by which you viewed all of the events that happened in something that we like referring to as World War I? Would you say that World War I is like objective fact or a narrative?
I'd say it's a narrative.
Yeah, because in a certain sense, it's a delineation. It's like a collection of narratives. But I mean, the fact that we, like, because nothing in reality, in the material, like, world that is the object of scientific investigation has a clear beginning and end point. Everything kind of flows from one form into another, you know? And so to say that, like, to draw it started now, it ended, like, it started at the assassination, it ended at armistice, right? Like, and the time from then to then is World War I, right? In the battles that ensued in that period were World War I, you know, like that. I mean, that's how I'd see it.
It's possible that it may not always be true that he was assassinated if in the future we redefine what, like, an assassination is. Like, if we decide that it is it's a moral imperative to, like, end the life of leaders, then he was not. I don't know. I'm not sure what the exact definition
actually,
of the word is.
Mike, you hit on it. That's interesting. Yeah,
but
the value judgment that goes along with, say, assassination, the social value.
Yeah, right.
It's we have like, in assassination.
It's a Jordan Peterson Darwinian truth.
Well, here's the thing. I was actually thinking I wanted to compare Exodus to Franz Ferdinand. Like, you, in the sense of, like, will we at one day be reflecting upon Franz Ferdinand in the same way as Moses leading the Jews out of Egypt, you know?
Possibly, but we would have to lose so much knowledge. I feel like everything is just so documented now. Maybe not.
Yeah, but then won't it be like Ozymandias? You know, like what is the reality principle that's required for us to maintain these vast stores of knowledge? You know, like our society, think of all the societies that came before us, all the civilizations that came before.
Well, all it takes is enough electricity to keep servers running.
Yeah, but what does it take to keep the electricity? What is it? Well, let me put it this way. More importantly, what does it take to maintain and recreate the human beings that keep the servers running, that create electricity, that can read and do things with computers?
Yeah.
I'm a little confused by this tangent. We're just talking about human extinction?
No, I'm not talking about extinction. I'm more talking about human civilization as a sort of organism. Well, in the sense, because like, sorry, go Eddie.
What I think you're saying is like the further away we get from an event, the less about the thing it becomes, right? And the more of a narrative it is, right? Like, so almost inseparable. Where like we remember the American Revolutionary War as like Washington beat the British, but in reality it was like, I don't know, thousands of individual events and people and, conditions that because we're 250 years past it or whatever doesn't, means that it's just no longer like a thing.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that, but then I kind of tried to jump back onto the idea of the reality principle in the sense of the thing of what governs what recreates the human beings within a culture and within a civilization, because I don't think that's a very
it's when a man loves a woman.
No, but see, it's not a neutral thing. Like, that's the thing about human civilization that I think Freud, this is like the upside of it, not in the certain sense, yes, it represses the individual, but, think about the ways in which, like, we have to be domesticated into language. But then because we're domesticated into our language, we're able to tap into and read the works that, come down from thousands of years ago, but it requires, there's certain things that are required to be done to a human being, to a biological human, for them to be a human being in our society.
Yeah, I guess I just can't conceptualize what it would be like for somebody in a radically different society to look back at like Wikipedia pages or surf the web of what we were seeing and not be able to understand it.
Really? You think it's just that well, Mike, think how hard it is for have you tried to play any games from like 98 or like from like older operating systems?
Yeah. Right.
Like, like old computer games, like games that you used to play on maybe an old Mac or a Windows 95 or 98 computer.
Right.
Have you tried to go back and play those?
You're saying that there's just incompatible software.
Yeah, or like think about we talk about everything being immortal.
But everything would get
Think
carried.
about all the web pages.
No,
think about all the web pages that you grew up on that don't exist anymore. And there's not even, like, I can't even find them on the Internet Archive. Like, they're gone. All the old GeoCities sites. Maybe if I looked really hard, I could find some small scrap of them. But, like, we think about these things as being immortal because, everything stays on the internet. But not only are the artifacts left behind by, human activities gone, but like the human subjectivity has changed from how it was when I'm just talking about decades ago.
And this is the point that I'm trying to make, which is I just don't think that we're in that pattern anymore. Like, I think that we've broken out of the pattern just because of how documented everything is. I don't think that there's any way that we would escape it. There will always be a plethora of books, I think, that people have backed up just about everything they can online. Like, the amount of human knowledge right now in terabytes, like, compared to the amount of human knowledge in the Roman times or even 300 years ago. And I think that's why we can look back at the 50s and 60s or things that were before our generation and understand them so well, is because there is so much firsthand or primary, there's so many primary sources to draw from.
I guess I would just dispute that claim, just in the sense that we have even more, like in this, just the claim that you know what happened, the more primary sources there are. Also, I think it's actually less true.
Also, the way that I understand things is going to be different than the way you understand things are. So it's not like we could always look back and understand how things were, right? Because they are going to be different from each person's perspective.
Can you elaborate on that, Nathan? You said the more primary sources we have, the less likely they are to be true?
No, it's not so much the less likely they are to be true. It's the less likely you are to be able to understand and formulate a individually understandable truth. Well, I guess that's the main thing is, like, think about how much is going on in the world. Like, think about just like, say, one recent protest or something, to know what really happened there. Think about the monumental amount of work that would be to take all the different Instagram, Twitter videos, all the different blog posts, all the different Facebook posts, leading up to and following it, and to combine all of those into one coherent story. Like, think how impossible that is.
But it's
if
just...
If you're trying to be a completionist, then I'd say, yeah, but like, thinking of, like, I'm seeing videos of protests that I see one 30-second clip, it tells me one narrative, and then I can get a second primary source, and I get a completely different side of the issue and definitely a more complete picture. If not, you're not getting, like, obviously the exact feeling of what it was like to be there and see everything that happened, but...
Right, and I would also say it's equally impossible to do it now. Even like a day after the protest, you physically cannot take primary sources and use it to reconstruct what actually happened, because what actually happened is only known by the people who were there, the people who experienced it.
Well,
everybody else is just
Mike,
getting somebody else's opinion of what happened.
Mike, I disagree with that. Here's the thing. I don't think even if you were there, I don't think you can fully understand it.
You can't fully understand it.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
You have knowledge of it, like if you experienced it.
Well, yeah, you have. Well, see, that's the thing. You can develop. No, I'm not saying you can't develop knowledge of something.
Okay.
Like, I mean, I think Eddie's thing of like, oh, I watched 30-second video, like I read something, like, I think that's fine. Like, I'm not saying, that it's all an illusion or whatever, let's go like full Buddhist here, it's all the, Mara or whatever, it's all illusion, all is illusion,
Okay, but let's compare.
I'm not saying that.
Let's compare this hypothetical where you have a plethora of primary sources about a protest to like an event, like, a battle, like a Roman battle or something, where it's just incredibly sparse primary sources. And so
or the Bible.
The impression that is formed in the protest scenario, I think, is better. It's more valuable because it's more accurate. Like, there's so many things we could think, were there 500 people there? No, we can see that there were fewer than 500 people there. There's just more facts, which gives it more value as a historical narrative.
Well, here's actually where I differ with you in terms of, like, say, the protest is. So you have these videos of these protest moments, but where's the videos of the moments of, like, police meetings, of, like, the private conversations between, like, commissioners and the mayor?
Yeah.
Right. Like, see, all of those in terms of, like, what's really going on.
Yeah.
To answer that question, what is really going on here?
Yeah, it's not just the protest.
It's not just the protest. It's okay. Well, what's been going on within, like, the police bureaucracy? What's been going on within our city government?
Yeah.
What's been going on within our national government? Like, in terms of, like, looking at the militarization of the police.
Well, do you know
it's not something that you can understand just from like no thousand, like, however many videos of protests will not, like, reveal, like, the truth unless you're like, in a certain sense, ignoring all those videos and not considering them as evidence.
But in this case, then nobody could understand it, right? Because there's not a single person who is a fly on the wall of everything that is happening to bring about this event. Therefore, I guess what I'm saying is, in as much as Mike, people can know.
Mike, this is why frameworks like Marxism are valuable. Mm-hmm. Because they say, okay, let's take all these events and let's look for specific things. Let's look for where's the money going. Let's look at who benefits, Let's look at these sorts. Let's look at the massive pile of history. And let's only look at certain things. And let's see, when we only look for these certain things, what pattern arises.
And I think that's well and good up until it reaches a contradiction or it is disproven by a fact. And then it no longer ceases to be as valuable. But I'm not sure if that's the point that you're making.
Mike, the point I'm trying to make is that the facts don't disprove the framework. The framework generates the facts. So you would say you apply a Marxist framework to the events going on. Certain facts would arise from that framework of analysis. Okay?
Yeah,
certain things would rise to the fore as the important thing.
Again,
and I'm not saying they are the only or the whatever thing. I'm saying that there are certain facts that it would cast light upon.
And again, I think what it's doing is just like with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, is it creates a relative importance on things that are either true or false. Like, how important was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand for the start of World War I? Well, that depends on the framework that you're using. But if your framework was to say Franz Ferdinand is alive and lives in Las Vegas, then it's not a good framework.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm just trying to say that how do you call it? The look at the video. Like, what is it? I think this is out of Baudrillard, but the idea of like, we live in a pornographic society in the sense that if we don't see it, if we don't see the video, if we don't have that literal video documentation, it's almost as if it didn't happen, or like we have to see it. But even if we see the video, that doesn't mean it happened, because think about how you might see one of these protest videos, but then someone else on the opposite political side sees, oh my God, Antifa thugs out of control, fighting our boys in blue, you see the same things happening, but what they mean, the meaning that's attributed to the events is entirely a separate thing.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean,
in the certain sense that you feel that your framework is the true one, that you are the neutral observer.
But then
I completely disagree with that.
How do you evaluate then the goodness or badness of a framework if all of your value is being determined by your framework, right? Like if you look and you decide Marxism is a bad way of looking at things, how can you come to that conclusion without having a Marxist explanation for why you feel that way?
I mean, how could you come to that? Well, I mean, you can easily come to that without needing a Marxist explanation, right? I mean, a Marxist explanation would give an explanation why someone would refuse a Marxist explanation. Like, there's good, I mean, that's kind of the whole notion of like critique of ideology, is the fact that people don't want to believe things people don't want to believe they're working class. People don't want to believe that they're the powerless ones in society. They'd much rather identify with the powerful who are stomping them in the head, than actually confront the fact that, no, they're getting stomped in the head because they're weak and stupid and too cowardly to fight back.
Yeah.
But they don't need a Marxist explanation. They don't need a Marxist framework to get the boot kicked in their head. In fact, it probably hurts more to take on that Marxist framework, but there's potential for liberation. And I think that's like Marcuse's, like why Marcuse pursues or looks at things at least somewhat from a Marxist perspective, is because he's interested most predominantly with human liberation. You know, how can why does the human need to be restrained beyond the point of why do we need the surplus repression? Like, obviously the human needs to be repressed, but why beyond the point that's necessary to maintain the reality?
Yeah.
You know? To keep things working.
I certainly appreciate having an optimistic perspective, because I feel like that's pretty rare in philosophy. And I think that's good. But I don't know. I guess I just don't understand how you can draw a distinction between the correct amount of repression and then what part is surplus repression. Like, it just feels, it feels like if you were to take a crack at it, you could just as well be wrong about the origin of a particular form of repression. Like, you could say, on one hand, this is like phylogenetic and it's just part of being a human, and on another hand, you could say, well, this is capitalism and it doesn't have to be this way. And I mean, like, for example, how do we know it's just not part of the human condition to feel alienated? Like, from an evolutionary psychology perspective, that seems like a totally reasonable hypothesis. It's normal and it just happens regardless of the society you're in to feel alienated and to do things that, you know, you don't feel connected to, and to have alienated labor. Like, I don't know that necessarily has to be a capitalistic thing. It could be, but how do we know that that's capitalism?
Well, I agree with you, because in a certain sense, you know, because capitalism, from my perspective, imitates a lot of feudalistic, you know, social relations.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think that's becoming more and more the case now. Like, obviously, alienation is not solely capitalistic. Yeah, I mean, I think the point is just under capitalism, literally, there's where the incentives lie in capitalism is towards further commoditization, further alienation. That it's not that alienation is solely a product of capitalism, but that capitalist dynamics do lead towards and do tend towards alienation.
Okay, here's a question I kind of had: is picture somebody who has today freed themselves from the toil of, you know, labor, right? Like, so maybe they've retired. Are they beyond, like, the domination of society? Are they?
No.
Okay.
No, well, see, that's the thing. I mean, he talks about it a lot, how one of the problems with alienated labor or our society is the way in which it becomes totalizing. So even though, you know, we have 8 hours of work, let's say 10 hours of work because you got to commute. You have 8 hours of sleep, you know, say, like, you know, he kind of came down to the point, and I kind of experienced this in my life. You have about 4 hours of, like, your pleasure time.
Right.
Outside, you know, that you work for. You give up all the other hours of your day so that you have 4 hours of pleasure. Yep. But in those 4 hours of pleasure, think about or leisure, let's say, your 4 hours of leisure time, how quickly that becomes filled, you know, how quickly, like, television, be it a television show, how quickly your leisure is no longer even leisure. It's no longer truly free, just not doing anything activity. You know, I think Bertrand Russell did a essay on, like, in defense of leisure.
Yeah. I need
to reread it. I read it at one point in time, but, you know, he essentially just talks about how, like, how great it is that you can, but, like, think you get vacation, and how quickly do you start to cut it up and put it into, like, okay, I'm going to do this, like, or say you go on vacation, you know, you go to you go somewhere. Think how quickly you have to, like, schedule everything, you know, to be able to be at the museum at this time, and then be here to check out this this cultural site.
But isn't that just like a smart decision, right? Like it's not that you're not enjoying yourself. Like you haven't taken the fun out of it, but what you've done is you've given up a little bit of enjoyment, which is just sort of the feeling of not having to be anywhere, and replaced it with now you get to see all these different things that you wouldn't have gotten to see if you didn't feel particularly compelled. And that provides you lasting enjoyment because then you'll always have those memories and can talk about them and etc. So it's
true. It's a trade-off. But no, see, that's the thing is it a plus or a minus is hard to say. Because like in the same way that he talks about sexuality being focused into the genitals, when it's truly a whole body experience, or at least let's say libidinal pleasure is not a solely genital thing.
Right. We've all seen the Orgasmatron from that Woody Allen movie that takes place in the future.
What is this?
There was some what is it? It's called Sneakers or something. It's like a Woody Allen movie.
I haven't seen that, but he like gets frozen or something thawed out in the future, right?
Yes.
But it's like, okay, but it's like full body pleasure. Like It's just pure pleasure.
Yeah, exactly.
Machine.
Exactly.
But see, isn't that the purest form of alienation right there? That even your pleasure, you've been fully alienated even from like any active process in that pleasure. Like, isn't that horrific on some level?
Only insofar as it represents the death of the reality principle, because what you've given yourself over completely to the pleasure principle at that point, where there's just no you, all there is pleasure. And I have a hard time reading it as these authors saying that's not a good. They almost seem to be saying that is the original state that we want to be in, and what, when we pursue the reality principle, we get civilization, and look at how fucking bad civilization is. I don't even think Marcuse is that optimistic, at least in the first half of the book, because he talks so much about how civilization has led to like alienation and all that, where like what it seems like the answer is less civilization, less repression. If you want less civilization, do more of the pleasure principle pursuit than the reality principle. But
yeah, I mean, I guess that's the thing with pleasure. It's hard to say. I do find that I don't particularly, like, one of the reasons I highly undervalue utilitarianism is because I don't think happiness is all that great a thing. I certainly don't think it's like the chief good. But in a certain sense, I see the overcoming of like, in a certain sense, I do like, I don't, again, this is like the what did he say? When the super ego makes, how do you put it? The super ego makes or allies with the id to suppress the ego.
No, other way around. It's like grafted onto the ego to suppress the id.
No. But he says there was somewhere about like in terms of like, I forget if this was the nirvana principle or fighting going against the nirvana principle in a way that I just remember there being a point made with the super ego making a bargain with the id to repress. I think this was talking about like against the Oedipal, or against the like because he sees in some way the Oedipal as being like the nirvana principle, like the being like stuck in the womb, but shit, I kind of forget exactly. But I think there's something in, I don't think humans are fully like themselves if it's just happiness or pleasure, because it's like, in a certain sense, it's almost like the confrontation of greater realities.
Well, let me ask you then, does somebody who has sacrificed and given into society all day, every day, they are constantly in pursuit of the reality principle, constantly self-denying, Nietzsche's perspective, life-denying, what do they have more of? Do they have more of a personality? Do they have more of an ego, more libido? Like what does taking that too far in that direction, or what is it just taking it far in that direction lead to?
Oh yeah, well I think that to the degree that I don't like our current, I think our current reality principle is bad. I don't think that I don't think that all reality principles are bad. I guess that's my point, is like in the sense that in our society, you know, kind of when you were talking about that, I was thinking about like American Psycho.
Yeah.
You know, in the sense of someone who's fully subsumed within our system, who fully like if you fully buy in, you're dead. You're not there, really. You know, the point is not to give in to the reality principle. It is in the fight against it that life is, I think, like that's kind of Freud's point, right? Is that Eros is more full in the libido's attempt to confront reality, like in that like conflict.
Yeah.
Is where life is. I just think the thing is we in the way that we, you know, like think about this, like you've done more psychedelics than I have, but like isn't one of the magical things about psychedelics just that you kind of you go back to that pure libidinal pleasure, like you just fully, like just the way that, like, just to feel something.
I mean, you can
just
definitely
to feel the textures.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely get
appreciate it,
depersonalized, but I don't know if.
Well, I'm not talking about the ego death point, because I've never even really gone there. But like, say just a light dose of acid or mushroom, and just like you can just enjoy the sensations on your body.
Right.
You know, like the sand between your toes, or you know, the differences between hot and cold, or just like when you drink a cold glass of water and you're thirsty. You know, all of those are like libidinal pleasure.
Yeah.
You know, but like how many people don't get to even, they like it's there, but they don't even enjoy it because like their mind is like focused on something else.
But you're not enjoying the thing. You're enjoying being on acid while experiencing the thing. It's like, I don't know, people will always sort of be in a flux.
No, acid just, see, I guess I would disagree with that formulation, because you're not, sorry, Mike, I can't hear you.
No, I'm listening.
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, acid just opens up and it like just changes the gating, your internal gating.
And I think that's like, what
you're not just enjoying acid, because some of it lasts. You know, like when I first did mushrooms, it was like, oh, this is like, I was here on the Pacific Crest Trail when I was like hiking alone for a while, you know, like it's not just on that drug, you know, and like once you do the drug, it's not like you have to do the drug to be there. Like the drug's like a tutor. It just kind of reminds you by like kind of changing some of your internal like perceptional sort of blockages or walls.
Well, I don't know. Okay, so let's say, you know, you're walking down the street and you feel the wind through your hair. And on most days, it's not even going to register. It doesn't mean anything. And then one day, you know, you don't have a lot of cares. You're just having a good time and you feel it and you're like, oh, that feels really nice. And you enjoy that.
Yeah.
And then if you're on like LSD and every little sensory experience is resulting in euphoria, then what you're enjoying is not, I guess that's the point I'm making, is what you're enjoying is not necessarily the sensory experiences. More primarily, it's what the LSD is doing to you, which is elevating your sensory perception. And that's enjoyable. And the individual things are the vehicle through which you're enjoying it, but it's still LSD is like the operative agent. But
well, I mean, in the sense that, well, why are you identifying as being not the LSD? You know, I guess I see it as a like where do you internally identify? Like, how do you internally represent your own self-experience to yourself? Is not like, that is to some degree subjective. Like, I mean, and here's the thing though, is like you don't need the LSD to get there. Like the LSD is a quick, like a teleport there. But like you can develop the same way that we have been developed out of it.
Yeah.
We can develop ourselves into it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Like the other senses, just because we're so ridiculously visual and auditory now, doesn't mean we've lost the other senses. But like, obviously, if we don't put time into developing them, they atrophy.
Right.
Just like any skill, just like if we stop talking for a while, we'd probably have some issue think about communicating with another human being. Like, think how different this is to like if we were talking in person, and I could like feel your breath, and see your body language.
Yeah.
And like the way you move, and like how do we make eye contact, and like all the moments that lead up to it, and like, are we smoking? Are we drinking? Like, think about the rich libidinal experience that would be.
Okay, well,
and how sad this is.
Here's my argument maybe against even the idea of the reality principle, which is I don't think that there's a single point in time during our development as an individual when we are even within the pleasure principle, operating within the pleasure principle. Because like, I feel like one could argue that it's the superego that works in favor of the reality principle as it sort of overtakes the pleasure principle, and then you get civilization. But even before the development of the superego, like with my kid, I feel like he's already starting to develop a reality principle that explains, or that is starting to replace this pleasure principle. And I feel like that's kind of what they were saying, is it even happens when you're an infant. And if it's something that happens in infancy, how can that be caused by civilization? Like, I think that what it's just describing is part of normal human psychological development, which is, I don't know that I would view it in terms of like a dialectic like that, where you have a pleasure principle that's replaced by a reality principle. Like, why not just look at it as like, there's the reality principle and there is no pleasure principle, or something like that?
I mean, I think, do you remember in Civilization and Discontent, he just says that, like, if you, I think he just kind of put the reality principle as an uncontested thing, as all people want to be pleasured. All people pursue pleasure when not when not restrained, or whatever. I forget exactly how Freud put it, but he said essentially people pursue pleasure, but they also don't. So like, why don't they? It's like, we must kind of assume that against this pleasure principle, there must be some counteracting force, like,
yeah.
Like, that's, and again, this is not like a factual, or this isn't like some, empirically verifiable, quantifiable thing. This is inherent to Freud's framework of the world, is this kind of dichotomy between pleasure and reality, in the sense that we want pleasure, but we also don't, but we don't just do the things that give us pleasure. Why is that not the case? What's keeping it? And so then you get in this, then it kind of goes back to like, well, at some point there must have been some father, who monopolized all the pleasure, and so he kind of develops this, and then there's like implications that arise from that, but it's not like, because like you said, like your son, I mean, he's already in communication with the mother, like, in the sense that I assume he's not like eyes open yet, right? He's still kind of just like grasping for the teat.
No.
Probably can't really keep his neck up.
Well, he can't really keep his neck up, but he's pretty alert.
Yeah, eyes open, like.
Yep. But that's about it. I mean, he doesn't really have any fine motor skills or anything like that.
Yeah, but no, like you said, he's already in this.
Right, like he's already learning.
Yes. But see, here's the other thing. He's been learning since he was in the womb.
Yeah.
Like, he's been learning before you ever saw it.
Yeah, that's true. And it's kind of funny because the things that he wants are the things that most closely resemble the womb. But, yeah. And that's just because he had been in the womb for 9 months.
Yeah, like, what is, I was, they were talking about, this came up in it was about the Oedipus complex in Lacan, and just the idea of like, when you have a desire, like as a baby, and this is kind of like how we develop, as we develop further and further along, like when you're in the womb, your needs are almost instantly met. Not entirely, but like you have a desire and it is met. You have a need and it is fulfilled immediately. You're kind of swimming in this reciprocal like feedback between you and your mother's body, right? And then it becomes like, but then you're separated from that, and you have to make like vocal demands for that. Like you have to make yourself heard to get that.
Yeah.
Right. Like I assume there's a lot of crying.
Yep.
A lot of screaming.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually kind of funny because when he was just born, if you put something in his mouth, like a finger, it would calm him down. He'd start sucking on it because, he thought it was a nipple. But what he started doing is opening his eyes and realizes very quickly that it's a finger in his mouth and not a nipple. Like he sees it, he makes eye contact, or not eye contact, but he like looks at it, sees my hand in his mouth.
Yeah.
And his brow furrows, and he like he's still like not crying because the finger's in his mouth, but he starts to get like upset by it. And I'm like, so he's learned that like not only is there this like mouth sensation, but there is like the one that looks right and the one that leads to milk, as opposed to other mouth sensations like a pacifier or a finger that don't. But and then more recently he's actually started liking a pacifier, even though it doesn't have milk, but I don't know, it's weird. I guess he does like the mouth sensation, but
well, I mean,
as long as it's not visually obvious that he's being denied milk by seeing a hand or something.
Oh, that's so funny. Yep, no, he's confronting the reality principle.
Yeah, exactly. But then that makes me wonder, like, how much of this can I avoid, right? Like, I don't want to like dump civilization on him, but a lot of this stuff is independent of civilization. Like, regardless of where we are or our material conditions, that same exact thing would have happened. So maybe that's the normal repression, that's going to come about. And then the surplus repression is all of the alienated labor, stuff like that he'll suffer through later.
Mike, the main thing is, like, where I see our repression, or really our socialization, and you can decide for yourself, where, like, to what, I mean, in a certain sense, you're going to determine some degree of his surplus repression. I mean, I guess the main thing is like what school you get him into, Right. In some schools, it's going to be incredibly repressive. In some, it'll be a very productive repression.
Yeah.
In some, they'll focus on obedience, just because they're the powerful ones, or is it going to be obedience because, these are the things that will benefit you?
Yeah.
Like having authority, like one problem I always find on especially like our modern left politically, is just the idea that like all authority is bad. And I think fundamentally that certain authorities are productive. I think that's really the key with the reality principle, is that understanding and obeying certain restrictions is beneficial and leads you to better places. What's up?
Yeah, I think I disagree with that.
Really?
I don't know, because I feel like whenever you follow authority, you are placing a limitation on yourself.
Yes, but are limitations bad inherently?
I think so. I think by definition, it is, limitations are bad. And the fewer limitations you have, the more you can experience. Thus, from an existentialist perspective, the better your life will be. Therefore, limitations are bad.
I very, very strongly disagree with that, because in a certain sense, like, you look at your own life and your own enjoyments, your own pleasures that you're able to experience. What are the limitations you imposed upon yourself, or what to retrace your steps. Say you wanted to help your son get to a place similar to you, right? What are the limitations that you need to put onto him and that you need to help him put onto himself?
Yeah.
So that he would be able to achieve and reproduce what you have achieved.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the word achieve is a little maybe even questionable here, because we are kind of saying that, like, I'm deep in society, and I guess he will be too.
Oh yeah, we all are.
Yeah,
Mike, there's no getting. See, that's the thing though, is that
right.
Here's the thing. Please do not be a permissive father to your child, in the sense that you can do anything. You can be whatever you want. You just have to want it, and the universe will deliver it to you.
Well, okay, I mean, that part I disagree with, but I will say that the limitations.
Please love your son enough to not do that to him.
Yeah,
because that's so much more cruel than to be like a disciplinary, like someone who like regiments his life, you know? Because at least that way you come out, you've got some discipline, you know, you can get up in the morning, get to a job and earn some money, you know? Like, to just say, be whatever, you know? It's like, oh, and then you'll be treating him for ADHD in high school. He'll be on stimulants, you know? It's like, he won't be able to hold down a fucking job, you know, or earn an income, you know, or achieve anything in life, you know, because in a certain sense, you have to impose some social restrictions upon your son so that he can survive in the restrictions that everyone else will place upon him.
Right.
You need to show him how to navigate the obstacle course of society, you know, with all the bureaucratic and other tripwires.
I mean,
you know,
I guess I at first thought you were talking more about like you or me accepting limitations. Like, as an adult, it doesn't seem.
I think that too.
What?
No, well, see, Mike, I think like even myself, like, say I want to get better at archery, you know, like say I want to like be in better physical health. Like right now, like I've got certain problems like with my legs, like some of my muscles are too tight, you know? And I know that if I, for like say 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes a day, do a certain like stretching yoga routine, I essentially sacrifice those 30 minutes. I limit myself from being able to do anything but these things every day.
I think that's a different kind of limitation, though. Like, weren't we talking about like an authority figure doing a limiting? Like,
I'm being an authority to myself.
I think that's a little different, though, because you are acting in your own best interest.
Mike, well, here's the thing. Some people will some people will pay a life coach. Some people will pay a counselor. Okay. Some people will pay a guru to tell them what to do.
Yeah, to limit them.
Or even a physical coach. They'll say, hey, I don't know this thing. Tell me what to do so I don't have to think about it. They will accept that person's authority into their life, and they may benefit from that.
Yeah.
They may get healthier. They may get skinnier.
Again,
you know? They may achieve certain things they could not have achieved otherwise.
But it seems that this person is just an extension of themselves. Like, a tennis coach, for example, I could fire at any time. Like, they don't have any real authority. Like, the limitations that they put on me are ones that, like, I've put a limitation on them. Like, they have to work for me if they want to get paid, and they have to put these limitations on me. Like,
at the same time, Mike, I believe the value you'll get out of a teacher. Maybe because I've read too much like Oriental, sort of like Chinese or like whatever sort of fiction. But in a certain sense, your ability to really, like, if you really accept someone as a true authority, like you accept them as a parent or as you internalize them. You are literally going to make yourself them. You're going to take what they are and make it part of you. Mm-hmm. You're going to literally incorporate them into you.
Yeah.
And so, like, you don't really maintain your individual self anymore. If they are a true authority, if they're someone who truly...
Well, have you internalized
What's
any
up?
like police officers? Because those people are authorities, but they're not really ones that we...
Oh, no. Well, that's a very different... That's not entirely... See, this is the thing. I'm not talking about authority in just that narrow sense.
Okay. Because that's kind of what I'm
not saying
thinking when you
like,
say
oh,
authority.
yes, I am... I'm not talking about being like obedient to like the officer and being... I'm not talking about like being a submissive here. I'm talking about how we each accept, and that's the thing. I mean, how to recognize someone as an authority is maybe, but I'm saying that when you just write off all authority, all limitation, I say that that's naive, because in a certain sense, limiting allows you to do more rather than less. Just the same way that, like, in engineering, you can envision a machine not as like an assemblage of parts, but rather as a collection of restraint.
Yeah.
You know, like your engine can only work because you control and constrain that explosive fuel. You know, well, first you have to constrain it so that you capture the fuel in a spot, mix it with the air so that it can actually ignite for a spark. But then you also need to control then how will that move? You know, you control it on all its sides and allow it to only move in one direction. And then you control how that directional movement then, you know, moves the crankshaft. And your crankshaft has to then be restrained on both ends, you know, so that the power goes out the back end, you know, and then is transmitted. It's all a series of constraints.
But what you're describing is something
series of constraints
mechanical.
allows it to be, rather than just some little small fire, but for us to move shit all the way around the planet.
I mean, I follow you, but I also feel like you're describing like a machine and not a person.
Well, I am, but we consider ourselves machines now.
Also, the authority that I feel like you're describing is one that we have some agency in, right? Like you're describing, you know, benevolent teachers and fathers and people that I don't even know if you're describing a father, but you're certainly what seems like describing like experts or teachers or like, you know, people that benefit us. But when I'm thinking of trying to avoid unnecessary domination or trying to avoid unnecessary repression, I'm thinking of all those, you know, I'm thinking of the police officers. I'm thinking of, you know, the teachers who don't give a shit, who just want you to like, you know, who want to exert some control over you. And that is the kind of repression that I'm wondering. And I'm not even saying I'm going to try to avoid it in my child, but if you were able to, what would that accomplish? Like what kind of person would you become if you just were not subjected to the unnecessary, you know, repression in society?
Oh, I have no idea, Mike, because I have been subjected to a lot of unnecessary repression.
Right.
So I really don't. The thing that I would just say is to be able to recognize that that you do have teachers that are not necessarily there for you.
Right.
You know, because like there has been a few teachers I've encountered in my life, and especially like in better schools. I think you have a far, to the degree that your property value still continues to represent the quality of your child's school, you know, like you should be all right. But I mean, it's very difficult, you know, especially I really would love to pick out the chapter where Montaigne talks about education, because he said it, he put things very well in terms of like education, in terms of like for growing a person. But, you know, you have to deal with a lot of BS in our society, you know, and it's very hard to distinguish who wants to benefit you and who doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, how is this teaching gonna lead me to a better place, or is it not? And I think in that sort of frame is something that I've, you know, worked really hard to try and figure out for myself, because it was definitely not provided for me. And it's something I myself had to make because, I felt tossed about. And so I've kind of developed it in response. Like I have a certain framework myself for how I judge, something to be useful or not. I just think just to make sure that, I don't know. I just feel like we, as a parent, nowadays, just thinking about how the internet will mess with your kid's brain, like how it's like what it did to our own.
Oh yeah.
I mean, maybe I know there's a lot of fear among parents about like screens and, being like, I don't know, propagandized or having your mind rotted or whatever. And I'm sure like every generation's kind of thought about the youth, like, oh, scared that the youth aren't gonna like succeed or not, or I don't know. I just think that it's important for a parent to impose restraints just from the pure, like, maybe not even in a here's why, but sometimes just to say like, because in a certain sense the parent decides what the child's duty is.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I agree with you that kids, it's good for kids to have routine and for them to understand. Like, I think at a very young age, I'm going to explain to my kid that there's no God and how things work and not mince words and treat him like an adult. And like, I mean, I'm not saying that they're going to learn how things actually work. They're going to learn my perspective on how things work. But like, yeah. I mean, I think that they will get a very opinionated perspective, which I think is good.
Yeah. I think the most important thing, or what I would personally advocate, is to not try and sell your perspective as absolute.
Yeah.
But as your perspective, or not even to say that it is your perspective, but just to embody it.
Yeah.
Because like there's something like Zizek, one of the things that I first caught his attention is just that the difference between the father who says, you will visit your grandmother, and the father who says, we want you to visit your grandmother only if you want to visit her, because your grandma loves you, and don't you love her, like in a certain sense, it's the patriarchal, like authoritarian, just do it because I said so, allows more freedom.
Yeah.
Allows more of a sense of like, I know that I'm being oppressed. But it allows a certain subjective space of rebellion.
Oh, interesting.
Rather than if you demand of them not just to do it, but to do it authentically,
right,
with love. Because don't you love her?
Right. Don't
you care? Like there's something more horrible about that way of. There's something more submissive, I think it's dominating.
I think it's still the first thing. It's just harder to tell what it is. Like you're still just experiencing that this is a father who values you visiting your grandmother, but they're just really persuasive at it. Like they trick you into thinking that it's your own idea, but
yeah. I guess that's the main thing is there's a desire to dominate your subjective space.
Like make it very obvious that where your perspective stops. Like you can have a strong perspective, just make it clear that it's your perspective.
Yeah, or just the fact that no, you're doing this because I have power over you. You this is your duty because I'm the powerful one and you're not.
But again, this kind of like this is where I draw a distinction between authority which has your best interest in heart, like the father, versus authority which doesn't, like capitalism. Like capitalism just wants you to consume. It doesn't have any consideration for your well-being. And that is the kind of authority that I want to avoid. I'm okay with authority that's like in the child's best interest.
Yeah. Anyway. No, I guess the main thing is because like, I don't know. I think human subjectivities and like how we, like, what do we see ourselves? How do we see ourselves? How do we create the stories that remind us who we are and give us the like strength to go against obstacles and to fight against and to decide somewhat for ourselves who is the legitimate and illegitimate authority, who do I want to listen to and who do I not. Yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult one. Like I've thought a lot about it, just because I've thought of like, how would I not recreate myself, or how would I not create the things that annoyed me about my own growing up?
Yeah.
But
Hey,
I don't know. It'll be a fun trip for you.
I've got to run. I have to pee so bad, and then I have to take care of the baby. But
Yeah.
Do you? I don't think I want to read the rest of this book. I'm just not that into it.
Oh yeah, there's no need to. I was going to say, after chapter 5, it kind of, he talks. It's kind of his idea of liberation, but it just seems a little too woo woo. It's kind of like aesthetics and art, and it's kind of like,
Well, like, Eddie had suggested doing Denial of Death. Would you be interested in that?
Who's that by? That sounds great. Who's the?
He's Ernest Becker, a more modern take on Freud.
Okay.
I remember he's been talking about this book for a while, so I figure it'll be good. He'll almost certainly join us for the discussion if we do this one.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to say, was Eddie here? I heard him a bit, but
he had to drop off to take some clothes to the laundromat, or pick them up, I guess.
Oh, damn. Okay, I was going to say, it kind of becomes me. It was just me and you. I was like,
well, let's
do gonna pipe up?
Let's do the 21st, 2 weeks from now.
Sure.
Denial of Death is. Let me just see how many pages this is. Oof. Let's split it into 2 parts.
Yeah, sounds good. I have no problem doing like almost even just like one at a time.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start it, and I'll figure out a good way to break it up.
Yeah.
All right, man. This was fun.
Cool.
Good talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to talk more about child whatnots with you. I definitely want to hear more of your on the ground experience.
For sure. All right, man. Have a good rest of your night.
Peace. Sleep tight.